What would you do if the police showed up at your house, guns half drawn, because your neighbor reported you for trespassing, in your own backyard? Michael Carter had never expected to be in this situation. It was a warm summer afternoon, the kind of day made for lounging by the pool, a drink in hand, letting the world drift away under the Georgia sun. His dream home, the one he had spent 15 years in law enforcement saving for, was finally his, a beautiful two-story house with a backyard oasis that shimmered in the heat. But as he reclined in his lounge chair, soaking in the well-earned peace, the blaring of police sirens shattered the tranquility. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of his house. Before Michael could even sit up, he heard the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on the pavement. 2 uniformed officers, hands resting near their holsters, approached his fence with the kind of stiff posture that told him they were expecting trouble. One of them, a younger officer with sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in this pool area." Michael blinked, disbelief tightening in his chest. A familiar, sickening knot formed in his stomach as he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He already knew who was behind this. Through the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement, his neighbor, Karen Thompson, peering out from behind her curtains, a smug, satisfied smile creeping across her face before she disappeared from view. This wasn't the first time. Not even close. Michael clenched his jaw, already playing out the conversation in his mind. The officers would ask for ID, despite the fact that he was standing on his own property. They would demand proof that he lived here, that he wasn't some intruder sneaking into an upscale neighborhood where, according to Karen, he clearly didn't belong. He could feel the weight of years of experience pressing against his instincts. Stay calm. Document everything. De-escalate when possible. But this wasn't just an overzealous misunderstanding, this was a pattern, a calculated attack wrapped in a veneer of concerned citizenship. As he stood, already reaching for his wallet, he knew one thing for certain. Karen thought she had one. She thought this would scare him off, humiliate him, make him second-guess his place here. But she had no idea that today would be the last time she ever pulled a stunt like this. Let me take you back to where it all began. 2 months earlier, Michael Carter had stepped onto the front porch of his dream home, exhaling as he took in the sight before him. The house, with its tall white columns and perfectly manicured hedges, stood like a symbol of everything he had worked for, 15 years in law enforcement, endless overtime shifts, and a commitment to financial discipline that most people would never understand. This wasn't just a house, it was proof that his sacrifices had paid off. And the pool, sparkling blue in the backyard, was the final touch of luxury he had always imagined for himself. He had barely started arranging his patio furniture when he noticed her. A woman standing in the second-floor window of the house next door, phone pressed to her ear, staring straight at him. Michael paused, offering a polite wave. Instead of returning the gesture, she turned away sharply, her curtain snapping shut like the end of a stage play. The interaction left a sour taste in his mouth, but he brushed it off. It wasn't unusual for neighbors in gated communities like this to be a little standoffish at first. The next day, his phone buzzed with a notification from his security system. Someone had entered his backyard. Michael frowned, checking the footage. His stomach clenched at what he saw. There, lounging on one of his pool chairs as if she owned the place, was the same woman from the window. She wore an expensive-looking swimsuit, a luxury towel draped over the arm of the chair, and a pair of oversized designer sunglasses shielding her eyes from the sun. She was dipping her feet into his pool, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. Michael wasted no time. He drove home immediately, stepping into his backyard with measured restraint. The woman barely acknowledged his presence as he approached. "Oh," she gasped, feigning surprise. "I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy." Her voice dripped with condescension, her manicured hand resting on her chest in exaggerated innocence. "The previous owners always let me use their pool. Michael's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm not the maintenance guy. I'm the new owner of this house. And I'd appreciate it if you asked permission before entering my property." Something in her face shifted. The fake politeness gave way to something sharper, something uglier. She looked him up and down, then let out a nervous laugh. "You? The owner?" she scoffed, shaking her head. "I must have misunderstood. I know the realtor handling this property, and she never mentioned, well," she gestured vaguely toward him, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Michael had dealt with people like this before. He knew exactly what she meant. He had spent years enforcing the law, keeping his composure in situations far worse than this. But something about this woman, this entitled, smug stranger acting as if she had more right to be here than he did, made his blood simmer. "There's no misunderstanding, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice level but firm. "This is my home. And you're trespassing." She stiffened at that. A moment of hesitation flickered in her eyes, but instead of apologizing, she simply gathered her things with an air of indignant offense. "We'll see about that," she muttered under her breath as she walked away, her towel whipping through the air as she slammed the gate behind her. That was not a mistake. It was a promise. Over the next few weeks, Karen Thompson made it her mission to turn Michael's life into a quiet, insidious war of attrition. It started with small annoyances. He would wake up to find his morning newspaper missing. Then came the anonymous HOA complaints: his lawn was unkempt, his car was bringing down the property values, his porch lights were too bright. It didn't take long for Michael to put the pieces together. None of the other homes on the street had received similar citations, even though some had far more obvious violations. Then, one Saturday morning, Michael woke to the sound of laughter and splashing. His stomach dropped. He pulled back the blinds and felt his pulse spike. Karen had brought 4 of her friends to his pool. Champagne glasses clinked as they lounged on inflatable pool floats, chatting like they were at a luxury resort. Michael stepped onto the patio, his voice steady but firm. "You need to leave. Now." Karen barely glanced up. "Oh, don't be such a buzzkill," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "We're just having a little fun." One of her friends, clearly uncomfortable, whispered, "Karen, you told us you had permission." Karen shot her a glare before turning back to Michael with a smirk. "I don't see the problem," she said. "You hardly use the pool anyway." Michael took a deep breath, remembering his training in de-escalation. "This is private property," he said. "You've been warned before. If you step foot in my yard again, I'm calling the police." That got her attention. Karen's smirk faltered for just a second before she straightened her posture, lifting her chin. "Go ahead," she sneered. "I know everyone at the precinct. My husband plays golf with Captain Richards. Let's see how that works out for you." Michael didn't take the bait. Instead, that afternoon, he installed new security cameras, high-end ones with night vision, motion tracking, and cloud backups. Years in law enforcement had taught him one thing above all: document everything. And it didn't take long before the cameras caught Karen pushing things even further. She tested his gate, peered through his windows, and even attempted to use a key, the same one she had used before, likely a copy from the previous owners. But the final straw came when he returned home one evening to find 8 women lounging in his backyard, drinking wine, flipping through magazines, and treating his property like a country club. Michael didn't hesitate this time. He pulled out his phone and dialed the precinct. 15 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up. The officers, Davis and Martinez, stepped out. Michael had worked with them both before. "Mike," Officer Davis said, tipping his head in greeting. "Long time no see." Then he looked past Michael to the women in his backyard. His expression darkened. "Oh. It's one of these calls." Karen's tone changed instantly. She clutched her wine glass to her chest, her eyes going wide. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. This man has been harassing us. We've always had pool privileges with the previous owners, and he's being completely unreasonable." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, Mr. Carter was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing. You and your friends need to leave before we make this official." Karen's face burned red with humiliation as her friends scrambled to gather their things. But as she stormed out, she turned to Michael, her voice a low hiss. "This isn't over," she seethed. "You don't belong here. And I'll make sure everyone knows it." Michael stood tall, watching as she disappeared through the gate. He had no doubt she meant every word. But what Karen didn't realize was that Michael had spent 15 years dealing with criminals, liars, and manipulators. She thought she was untouchable. She had no idea what was coming next. Michael had dealt with all kinds of criminals in his 15 years as a cop, but none had the sheer audacity of Karen Thompson. Most people, when caught red-handed, back down. Not Karen. If anything, the police intervention at his pool only made her more determined to escalate her harassment. She wasn't just trying to annoy him anymore, she was out to destroy him. It started subtly. One morning, Michael stepped outside to grab his newspaper, only to find that it was missing. It wasn't a big deal at first, maybe a delivery mistake. But then it happened again. And again. By the 5th day in a row, he checked his security footage and, sure enough, there was Karen at 6 in the morning, walking up to his porch in her expensive silk robe, snatching the newspaper off his doorstep like it belonged to her. She didn't even try to hide it. The casual way she tucked it under her arm before sipping her coffee as she strolled back home made his blood simmer. Then came the HOA letters. First, a notice about his unkempt lawn, despite the fact that his grass was freshly cut and his hedges perfectly trimmed. Next, a fine for excessive decorations because of the small potted plants on his front porch, something half the neighborhood also had, but they didn't seem to be getting citations. Then, the most ridiculous one yet, a warning that his car, a clean and well-maintained SUV, was a visual nuisance. Michael knew exactly what was happening. Karen, with her little connections in the HOA, was using every loophole she could find to fine him into submission. But she wasn't done. The next blow came in the form of 2 uniformed Child Protective Services workers standing at his front door. Michael's stomach tightened as he let them in, confusion quickly turning to anger as they explained they had received a complaint, an anonymous tip about suspicious activity and potential dangers to children at his residence. Michael sat stiffly as they asked him questions, though it was clear from the start that the complaint was baseless. He was a single homeowner with no kids. He barely had visitors, let alone anything that would warrant an investigation. The CPS workers were polite but firm, they had to follow up on all reports, no matter how ridiculous. It didn't take long for them to close the case, but Michael knew exactly who had made that call. Karen had crossed a new line. But she still wasn't done. One night, flashing red and blue lights illuminated his front yard again, and this time, it wasn't the police coming for him, it was them responding to Karen's latest stunt. She stood on her driveway, wrapped in a blanket, her face streaked with fake tears, telling the officers that someone had broken into her house and stolen her jewelry. Michael stood on his porch, watching, already knowing what was coming. Within hours, the community Facebook page lit up with Karen's thinly veiled accusations. Asterisk, it's so sad what's happening in our once safe neighborhood. Some people move in and suddenly crime goes up. Stay vigilant, everyone. Asterisk. Michael didn't need to be a detective to see what she was doing. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against him, planting the idea that he, the new neighbor, was a threat. But what Karen didn't know was that Michael's security cameras weren't just covering his own property, they had a clear view of her house too. And when he reviewed the footage, he saw exactly what he expected. No one had broken into Karen's home. The only people who had entered her property that day were her landscaper and the mail carrier. Michael debated whether to confront her or let it play out. He knew Karen was trying to bait him into reacting, trying to make him lose his cool so she could paint him as an aggressor. So he did the one thing he knew she couldn't stand. He ignored her. But Karen wasn't done yet. A week later, she upped the ante again. This time, Michael got a knock at the door from a process server. Karen was suing him. The claim? She had tripped on his driveway and suffered a severe injury, which she believed was caused by his failure to maintain a safe property. The sight of her showing up at the next HOA meeting, sporting a neck brace and an arm sling, was almost comical. She milked it for all it was worth, sighing dramatically and casting pitiful glances around the room as she spoke about how unsafe the neighborhood had become. Unfortunately for her, Michael's security cameras had caught everything. The footage showed her walking up to his driveway perfectly fine, until she suddenly stopped, glanced around, and then threw herself to the ground like a bad soap opera actress. When Michael's lawyer sent the footage to the judge, the case was immediately thrown out. Karen's injury miraculously healed overnight. Most people would have stopped there, but Karen still wasn't done. She went for the nuclear option. Michael received an anonymous tip from a sympathetic neighbor that the HOA had scheduled a closed-door meeting, one that he hadn't been invited to. A few favors and a well-placed recording device later, Michael had his answer. Karen was working with the HOA to change the neighborhood rules in a way that would disqualify him from living there. The new bylaw they were trying to pass required homeowners to meet an additional set of community standards, things like specific employment history, financial requirements, and most telling of all, additional approvals from the HOA board for any new residents. It was a direct attack. A desperate attempt to get rid of him. But they hadn't counted on someone recording the meeting. At the next HOA meeting, Michael stood up in front of the room, pulled out his phone, and hit play. The room fell silent as Karen's voice crackled over the speaker. Asterisk, I just don't think certain people fit the neighborhood's values. We need to make sure we're protecting our property investments. Asterisk. Karen's face drained of color. Michael let the silence stretch before he finally spoke. So, he said, should we discuss real neighborhood safety now? Karen didn't say a word. The HOA was forced to scrap their new rule proposal immediately once other homeowners caught wind of the scheme. Even those who had stayed neutral in the past now saw Karen for what she was, a manipulative liar willing to abuse the system just to get rid of someone she didn't like. By now, Karen was fuming. Every single attempt to push Michael out had backfired spectacularly, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. And that's when she made her final, biggest mistake. Because later that night, when Michael stepped outside to check his backyard, he found his pool filled with foam and soap bubbles, floating in thick, white clouds across the water. Karen had just declared one final war. And Michael? He was about to end it. Michael stared at his pool, the once crystal clear water now choked with thick, white foam that swirled under the glow of his backyard lights. The scent of dish soap hung in the air, unmistakable, and with it came the final confirmation: Karen had officially lost whatever shred of subtlety she had left. For weeks, she had played her games, escalating from petty HOA complaints to legal threats, even trying to frame him as a criminal in his own neighborhood. But this was different. This was desperation. She had realized that no matter how many lies she told, how many complaints she filed, or how many people she tried to turn against him, Michael wasn't going anywhere, and now, she was lashing out like a cornered animal. But Michael wasn't angry. Not anymore. As he watched the soap bubbles drift lazily across the water, a slow, calculating smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. If Karen wanted to play games with his pool, maybe it was time to give her exactly what she wanted. But on his terms. Michael spent the next 2 days preparing meticulously. He did his research, cross-referencing maintenance guides, watching industry videos, and even reaching out to a contact from his old police days who specialized in forensic chemicals. What he found was better than he could have hoped for. A particular brand of non-toxic, professional-grade pool dye, used by maintenance companies to detect leaks, had an interesting chemical reaction when mixed with certain compounds. More specifically, it reacted only with expensive cosmetic products, the kind found in luxury sunscreens, lotions, and high-end makeup. The best part? The dye itself was invisible in water. It wouldn't turn the pool green, blue, or murky. But the moment it came into contact with skin covered in these products, it would develop a deep, unmistakable shade of neon green. And it wasn't an instant reaction. No, the color would develop gradually over the course of 20 to 30 minutes, ensuring that whoever had been in the pool wouldn't realize what had happened until it was far too late. Michael placed the order immediately, opting for overnight shipping. By the time the package arrived, he already had his security cameras repositioned, ensuring multiple angles of his pool were covered. He had learned one thing from dealing with Karen, ***, document everything, ***. Then, he waited. He didn't have to wait long. Through the ever-reliable neighborhood grapevine, Michael learned that Karen was planning one final pool party, a small gathering, she called it, something about maintaining property values and showing that certain neighbors weren't as important as they thought. Michael made sure she saw him leaving his house that morning, car packed as if he was heading out for the day. He watched from around the corner as she stood in her backyard, phone in hand, talking animatedly and gesturing toward his property. "Yes, he's gone," she said, her voice carrying just enough for him to catch. "Trust me, it'll be fine. Just bring your best swimsuit." Michael parked his car a few blocks away, then quietly made his way back through his side gate and into his home office, where he had the perfect vantage point of the pool. Right on schedule, Karen arrived at exactly 2:00 p.m., leading a group of 6 equally smug-looking women into his backyard, all dressed in designer swimsuits, oversized sunglasses perched on their noses, their high-end beach bags slung over their shoulders. Champagne bottles clinked, Bluetooth speakers crackled to life with soft jazz, and Karen, in all her entitled glory, raised a glass to the sky. "Ladies," she announced, stepping onto the patio like she owned the place. "Welcome to our Saturday sanctuary. What the new owner doesn't know won't hurt him." The women giggled, though some shifted uncomfortably. "Are you sure about this?" one of them asked hesitantly. "I mean, after last time." Karen scoffed. "Relax. He's gone all day. Now, come on, the water's perfect." Michael leaned back in his chair, his phone in hand, already recording. One by one, the women lathered on their expensive sunscreens and makeup, the exact brands Michael had tested beforehand. Then, they slid into the water, sighing in bliss, completely unaware of what was about to happen. It started slowly. 15 minutes in, one of Karen's friends looked down at her arms, her expression twisting in confusion. Karen," she said, her voice uncertain. "Is your skin changing color?" Karen turned, frowning. "What are you talking about?" Then she looked down. Her hands, normally a soft, bronzed tan, were now a deep, unmistakable shade of neon green. The scream that followed was legendary. Pandemonium erupted as the women scrambled to get out of the pool, their skin turning greener by the second, their arms, legs, necks, *** anywhere they had applied sunscreen, were now glowing like they had been dunked in radioactive waste, ***. "My daughter's wedding is next week," one of them wailed, staring at her now green legs in horror. "I have a date tonight," another sobbed, frantically rubbing at her skin, only to make it worse. Karen, dripping wet and absolutely fluorescent, turned wildly, searching for answers, and that's when she saw it, one of Michael's security cameras, its red recording light blinking cheerfully. Michael could see the exact moment realization struck her. She knew. she knew this wasn't a coincidence. She knew this had been planned. And for the first time since their feud had started, she knew she had lost. The scene that followed was pure gold. 6 panicked, neon green women fled his backyard in their dripping designer swimsuits, running down the sidewalk like a desperate parade of St. Patrick's Day mascots. Michael made sure to capture every single second. That night, he spent 3 hours editing the footage, adding a jazzy background track, the same one they had been playing at their party, and uploaded it with a simple title. Trespassing Karen Gets Green with Envy. It was an instant sensation. Within hours, it went viral. By morning, it was featured on multiple social media pages, news blogs, and even a local Atlanta news station. The footage of Karen's previous trespasses, combined with the final, glorious karma moment, spread like wildfire. By the time Karen saw it, it was too late. And the fallout? It was just beginning. The fallout from Karen's green-tinted disaster was immediate and far-reaching. By the time she realized just how viral the video had gone, it was too late. Social media exploded with memes, news outlets picked up the story, and local talk shows debated whether this was the ultimate example of karma in action. Her name became synonymous with entitlement gone wrong, and the comment sections on every platform flooded with stories of people who had dealt with their own neighborhood Karens. But the real damage wasn't just online, it hit her where it hurt the most. Her career as a real estate agent imploded overnight. Clients canceled listings, potential buyers questioned whether they could trust someone who trespassed on private property, and her own agency issued a carefully worded statement distancing themselves from her actions. The neighborhood WhatsApp group, once Karen's personal echo chamber, turned against her. People who had once ignored her antics now openly shared their own grievances, how she had tried to get a kid's basketball hoop removed, how she called the HOA on an elderly neighbor over holiday decorations, how she had made life miserable for anyone who didn't fit her idea of community standards. Even those who had tolerated her began avoiding her, unwilling to be seen associating with the woman who had been humiliated on such a massive scale. Karen's husband, a businessman who thrived on reputation and networking, was overheard at the country club complaining that he couldn't close a deal without someone bringing up the green wife fiasco. Within a week, Michael saw the inevitable, a for sale sign planted firmly in Karen's front yard. The moving trucks came 2 weeks later, and just like that, she was gone, slipping out of the neighborhood like a bad memory. But the stain she left, both literally and figuratively, was permanent. Michael never said a word to her as she packed up, never acknowledged her final bitter glances toward his house. He didn't have to. The victory wasn't just in watching her leave, it was in knowing that the community had finally come together, that people had stopped letting someone like Karen dictate their lives. His pool, once the battleground of her entitlement, became a gathering place for neighbors, a symbol of what real community looked like. The new family that moved into Karen's house, an interracial couple with twin daughters, fit right in. The once hostile neighborhood now had backyard barbecues, shared laughter, and, most importantly, peace. And as for Michael? He made sure to frame a single still from the infamous video, 6 green women fleeing down the street, and placed it near his pool gate. When visitors asked about it, he would just smile and say, "That's a reminder that karma has a way of making a splash." Karen was gone, but the lesson remained. And Michael had made sure she would never forget it. Have you ever had to deal with a Karen in your neighborhood? What's the worst entitlement story you've ever witnessed? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.